Good afternoon. Welcome to the instructional video describing the process for reviewing state, district, and vendor educator evaluation frameworks. The purpose of Session 3 is to review the process that you, as a member of the Texas Teacher Standards and Educator Evaluation and Support Systems Steering Committee, will apply to 1. Review state, district, and vendor-developed educator evaluation frameworks. 2. Complete an educator standards alignment analysis. And 3. Make recommendations to state leaders about effective teaching practices that should be seen during teacher observations. Over the next 2 days, you will participate in small group activities designed to engage you and your fellow committee members in thinking and talking about behavior associated with effective teaching practices and aligned to Texas's proposed teaching standards. Each committee member will review externally developed teacher observation rubrics and discuss how actions identified in the rubrics relate to educator effectiveness and improved student achievement. To complete the meeting's objectives, you will use the following materials: Texas's proposed teacher practice standards, teacher observation rubrics for Ohio on gray paper, North Carolina light purple, Colorado tan, Cincinnati yellow, and TAP on blue paper. You will also want to refer to the Session 3 tab in your participant binder, where you will find your group assignment. Each group or team will focus on one of the 6 domains in the teacher standards over the next 2 working days. You and your group mates will be responsible for providing input for your domain area to state leaders. However, please keep in mind that while your primary focus is a specific domain, you, as an individual, will have the opportunity to provide additional input on domain areas outside of your assigned group. The proposed teacher standards will be needed to complete a significant part of your alignment work for Session 4 and 5 activities. You and your team will review other teacher observation tools against the proposed standards. Therefore, it is a good idea to review the standards and substandards for your assigned domain so that you feel comfortable talking about these competencies with other members of your group. An illustration that describes the components of a rubric is located behind the tab labeled Rubrics in your participant binder. As you discuss content and synthesize information in your groups, you will want to use the terminology noted in this illustration. This will help ensure that all members of your team are referring to the same topics in your discussions. First, let's take a look at what a rubric is actually evaluating. In Payne and Myers' illustration, they refer to the performance or action being evaluated as the task. The task may provide a general description of the specific expectations. As you work in your teams, you will examine one or more tasks within each rubric. For example, Ohio's instructional planning, instruction and assessment, and professionalism. Next, you will notice that a rubric has a scale to indicate the level of proficiency at which elements of a task are performed. On the example, the scale includes excellent, competent, and needs work. Looking at the Ohio rubric, you will see that their scale includes the terms accomplished, skilled, developing, and ineffective. As you work in your groups, please be aware of the scale being used within each rubric. This will be especially important as you shift from working with one rubric to another because each has its own unique scale. For your alignment analysis work, you will focus quite heavily on the expectations for the highest level of performance. You will also notice that each rubric contains multiple dimensions. These provide a breakdown of the specific elements within the task. They will be your focus area as you conduct the alignment analysis against the Texas standards in your domain. The Ohio rubric has 4 dimensions for instructional planning: focus for learning, assessment data, prior content knowledge, sequence, connections, and knowledge of students. Finally, descriptions of dimensions, or descriptors, characterize the varying performance levels for each dimension. These may include distinct actions or behaviors across a spectrum, and they vary in appearance from rubric to rubric. For example, the Ohio rubric contains sentences to describe the different behaviors, while other rubrics may use bulleted phrases. Look at the top left description on the example rubric. It reads, "The presentation demonstrates a depth of historical understanding by using relevant and accurate detail to support the student's thesis. Research is thorough and goes beyond what was presented in class or in the assigned texts." The text in this cell provides an exact description of the optimum performance for the dimension being evaluated: knowledge understanding. This performance descriptor will be the source for alignment with the Texas Teacher Standards. During Session 4, you will transition into small groups in order to complete an alignment analysis of each of the 5 previously named rubrics against Texas's proposed teacher standards. At the conclusion of Session 4, each group will have reviewed all 5 rubrics and determined which of the rubrics' dimensions align to the Texas standards. Once you have joined your assigned group at your table, you will find laminated copies of all 5 rubrics. These copies will serve as a master set of rubrics and should not be cut or marked on at any time. You will also find 2 paper copies of the proposed teacher standards, 2 paper copies of the Ohio rubric, and 1 paper copy for each of the remaining 4 rubrics. Therefore, you may find it unnecessary to take your participant binder with you when you break into your team. Also at the table will be scissors, glue sticks, Sharpies, and other supplies. With the exception of Group 1, or Domain 1, who will receive their instructions directly from their facilitator after breaking into teams, each small group will begin their alignment analysis with Ohio's Teacher Observation Tool. Your group should begin by briefly scanning and becoming familiar with the features of Ohio's rubric, such as the layout, standards, and direction of the scale. The task is to read each dimension and its descriptors and decide, as a group, whether it aligns with any of the proposed Texas teaching standards in your assigned domain. You will repeat this process for each dimension in the Ohio rubric. Begin the analysis by locating a dimension description that is assigned the highest rating on the scale. You may choose to read that description out loud or individually.
Sure. The teacher establishes challenging and measurable goals for student learning that aligns with the Ohio standards and reflect a range of student learner needs. The teacher demonstrates how the goals fit into the broader unit, course, and school goals for content, learning, and skills.
In your group, keep in mind that the discussions are a critical part of the input process. While it is important to reach consensus, each group member should contribute to the discussion and provide reasons for his or her decision to support or refute whether a specific rubric dimension aligns to a Texas standard.
Students.
So far, I'm thinking this is really going to tie in with Domain 2.
Okay.
So let's dig deeper.
Teachers foster a predictable learning environment in the classroom in which each student has a positive, nurturing relationship with caring adults and peers. Does that fit anywhere within here thus far?
It talks about, that the teacher has an inclusive environment and views
Right.
differences in people.
Mm-hmm.
She's responsible for their growth.
Right. So I think this one, even on the first one,
Right.
creates a classroom environment conducive to learning.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that
Definitely 2.1.
2.1 fits in there.
Okay.
Just based off of that one. We
That
should
one?
probably keep going afterwards though. And
I would agree
to
with that.
see.
I would agree with that. So let's start there and work our way down.
As you perform the labeling process, make sure that you record the numbers precisely beside the dimension description to which Texas standards align. These notations will indicate to state leaders which standards your group believes aligns to each description.
So we know it aligns to 2.2. Let's go ahead and keep going and see if it fits with
Okay.
any of the other ones.
Sounds good. Learning, linking.
What do you think?
Actually, I think this is more of 2, 3.
Let's see. You know, I agree. So we don't write 2.3 on here, right? Is this when we get the extra page?
Right, I think we do need the extra
Okay.
page.
Okay.
If one dimension description aligns with more than one standard in your assigned domain, you will need to obtain an additional copy of that page and repeat the labeling process on the new rubric sheet with the new standard number. The facilitator will retrieve the page you request from a bank of additional rubric pages.
If your group finds that the dimension description aligns to an additional standard within your domain, ask your facilitator to obtain another copy of that rubric page. Once you receive the additional page, repeat the labeling process on the new sheet, recording the number of the second standard that aligns to that descriptor. Day 2. Completing an alignment organization. A facilitator will guide the groups of committee members through a review of their alignment work from the previous day. Each group will identify and organize the rubric dimensions that they determined were aligned to Texas's proposed standards. You will cut out these aligned rubric parts and attach them to a poster containing the corresponding Texas standard.
Here you go, Ed.
2.1. Okay, thank you. This is 2.2.
Another 2.2 here.
Okay. Does that get them all?
Fair enough.
Domain group members will work together and examine the results of the rubric alignment analyses displayed on the chart pages for their standards. At each chart, group members will discuss the teacher practices represented by each of the dimensions and their descriptors that they identified as aligned to that standard. You will determine which of those dimensions most accurately reflect the behaviors that effective teachers should demonstrate for that proposed Texas teacher standard. For this discussion, the focus should be on the behaviors represented in the descriptor, not the language used to depict it. The Texas rubric developers will determine the scale, performance indicators, and appropriate language for the rubric and its descriptors. For each of the domain standards, group members may select up to 4 dimensions that they agree best represent practices that teachers could demonstrate either during teacher observation or through other evidence that reflects their teaching practices across a performance spectrum for that standard.
This one talks about an environment that is inviting the families and significant adults. Does that get to engagement?
What about this one right here?
The teacher's analysis of student data and student backgrounds, so backgrounds accurately connect the data to specific instructional strategies and plans. So we can only pick how many? 4?
Looking at the 2 days in review, you and your group will have reviewed other states' teacher observation tools for coherence and alignment to a clear vision of effective teaching. You will have defined the elements that represent high-quality teacher effectiveness for purposes of teacher professional development and growth. You will have identified which Texas teacher practice standards define the knowledge, skills, and pedagogy that effective Texas teachers should demonstrate in teacher observations and evaluations, and you will have reviewed emerging effective practices for teacher appraisal and used the information to define the aspects of a state system for teacher appraisal that will evaluate teacher proficiency.